Penguin presents Never Look Back by Lesley Pearse, read by Holli Dempsey. Prologue. New York, 1900. Is she crazy? Fanny Lebrano whispered to her father as he came back from settling the old lady into a seat up in the bows of their tug. It was a grey March day, the blustery wind coming straight in off the Atlantic, and even in the shelter of the wheelhouse it was very cold. She has to be crazy to offer me $100, Giuseppe replied, the expression on his weather-beaten face one of utter bewilderment. But she sure don't sound like she is. Before making ready to cast off, they looked down through the wheelhouse window at the old lady. She had the style and poise of the rich women who lived on Fifth Avenue, swathed in a sable coat and matching hat. Yet that sort of woman wasn't likely to want to trip around New York Bay in an old tug. Fanny said she thought the lady was too fashionably dressed for someone of advanced years, and her dainty side-button boots were hardly suitable for a boat trip. Giuseppe was more concerned that she had no companion, and he found her tense stance and the way her eyes scanned the waterfront very suspicious. "What if she is crazy, Pa, and her folks are out looking for her?" Fanny said suddenly. "I know she got out of her fancy carriage and the driver said he'd wait for her, but if she catches a chill, we'll be blamed." Giuseppe pushed back his cap and scratched his head. "I guess if we don't take her, someone else will, or maybe rob her, too. Besides, she seems to know what she's doing, and about rivercraft. Asked me how long I'd been working the harbor, about you and where we lived. God damn it, Fanny, I want to please her. She was right kindly, but maybe I oughtn't have taken her money. $100 is a whole lot too much." Fanny half smiled at that. Her father looked tough, but he had a soft center. The elderly, children, and the very needy always plucked at his heartstrings. She had long since lost count of the loans he'd made to his brothers and sisters, which were never repaid. That was one of the reasons why they still lived in a cramped East Side tenement. "That fur cost a whole lot more than we can make in a couple of years," she shrugged. "We never asked her for that much, did we? She offered it. So I reckons we better look lively and cast off before she changes her mind." As the tug chugged along past the busy wharves, the old lady took a deep breath of the smoky, fishy-smelling air and smiled at the memories it evoked. 58 years had passed since she arrived here as a 17-year-old immigrant, staying for 5 years before moving on. And the place had changed dramatically in the intervening years. In her time, South Street was crammed with graceful sailing ships, bowsprits halfway across the cobbled quay, and drying sails flapping and crackling in the wind. The warehouses, grain stores, saloons, and sailors' boarding houses had been mostly rickety wooden places built in a higgledy-piggledy fashion. Now the ships were mostly steamers, the buildings all of fine, sturdy brick. Only the smell, the sounds of rumbling carts, the sailors and stevedores yelling to one another were the same. Prosperity shone out all over Manhattan. Where she remembered farmland, now there was street after street of elegant brownstone houses. Buildings so high she got a crick in her neck looking up at them. Sidewalks paved and the streets well lit. People travelled in overhead trains, and there was even talk of running one underground too. They had huge shops they called department stores, which sold everything from furs and carpets to a length of elastic or a set of buttons. In her time, Central Park had been swampy waste ground, and the most desperate of the Irish labourers who built the Croton Aqueduct, that miracle which brought piped clean water to the city, squatted there in squalid shanties with their pigs and goats. The park was wonderful, and she was so glad that the people of the city had somewhere serenely beautiful to escape to. But to her mind, the new Brooklyn Bridge was more splendid. While nature had created the true magic of the park, the bridge was an entirely man-made miracle. Engineering and artistry working hand in hand to make something which looked fragile and beautiful, yet was strong enough to withstand the elements and the heaviest of traffic. She felt no sorrow that the city bore little resemblance to the one she arrived in over half a century ago. For she was no longer the excited, wide-eyed girl who had fallen in love with its honest, brash and bold exuberance. They had both been changed by circumstance, ambition, greed, and powerful men. Yet that honesty she had loved it for was still in place. She hoped she'd retained her.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?